The sun had barely crept over the jagged horizon of the Arizona desert when Abigail Mercy felt the first blow of the day. Her Uncle Jeremiah's boot connected with the water bucket beside her cot, sending its meager contents splashing across the packed dirt floor of their cramped adobe dwelling. "Get up, you worthless girl," he slurred, the stench of last night's whiskey still heavy on his breath. "Water don't fetch itself." 17 summers had passed since Abigail's parents died of the fever that swept through Dry Hollow in '68, leaving her in the care of relatives who saw her as nothing more than an extra pair of hands. She rose silently, knowing that words would only earn her more of his fury. Her bare feet found the cold floor as she reached for her worn dress hanging on a nail by the wall. Through the thin curtain that separated her corner from the main room, she could hear her Aunt Martha stirring the coals in the stove. The woman's voice cut through the morning air like a rusty blade. "Make sure you bring back enough for the whole day, girl. I won't have you making excuses about the heat again." Abigail pulled her dark hair back with a piece of frayed ribbon, her fingers working automatically through the familiar motion. In the cracked mirror propped against the wall, she caught a glimpse of herself, thin from years of eating scraps, her gray eyes holding a weariness that belonged to someone twice her age. The dress hung loose on her frame, patched in a dozen places with whatever fabric Martha deemed too worn for her own use. The wooden yoke sat heavy across her shoulders as she balanced the empty buckets on either end. This ritual had defined her mornings for as long as she could remember, the 2-mile trek to Raven's Hollow, the only reliable water source near their homestead. The path wound through sagebrush and mesquite, past the abandoned silver mine where her father had once worked, before dipping down into the narrow canyon where the spring bubbled up from deep underground. As she walked, Abigail allowed her mind to wander. It was during these solitary journeys that she felt most like herself, not the invisible servant her relatives had molded her into, but a person with thoughts and dreams of her own. She remembered her mother's gentle hands teaching her to identify the healing plants that grew along the creek bed yarrow for wounds, willow bark for fever, plantain for snake bites. These memories were precious treasures she guarded carefully, knowing that showing any sign of her mother's knowledge would only invite her aunt's scorn. The town of Dry Hollow had never been much to speak of, a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a main street that turned to mud in the rare rains and dust the rest of the year. The saloon, the general store, the blacksmith's shop, and a handful of houses made up the entirety of civilization for 50 miles in any direction. Most folks were trying to scratch out a living from cattle ranching or prospecting in the played-out mines, holding on to dreams that the desert had long since burned away. Abigail passed the widow Henderson's house, where laundry already flapped on the line like surrendering flags. The woman watched her from the porch, her face pinched with the particular brand of pity reserved for orphans and strays. Abigail kept her eyes forward, having learned that acknowledgement only invited questions about her welfare, questions that would find their way back to her aunt and uncle, bringing punishment for spreading tales. The morning heat was already building, promising another scorching day. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she navigated the rocky trail that led away from town. Here, among the Joshua trees and towering saguaro cacti, she could pretend she was somewhere else entirely. Sometimes she imagined she was one of the heroines from the few books she'd managed to read before her aunt declared such pursuits a waste of time, women who traveled to far-off places and made their own choices. A roadrunner darted across her path, its rapid footfalls stirring small clouds of dust. Abigail paused to watch it disappear into a cluster of prickly pear, envying its freedom. Everything in this harsh landscape had adapted to survive. The creatures that moved by night, the plants that hoarded water in their flesh, the people who hardened their hearts against the brutal realities of frontier life. The sound of horses approaching made her step aside into the brush. A group of cowboys from the Rocking Bee Ranch thundered past, heading toward town. She recognized Tom Bradley among them, his hat pulled low against the sun. He'd spoken kindly to her once at the general store, but her uncle had made it clear that no decent man would want a penniless orphan. especially one who'd been tainted by Indian ways, a reference to her mother's knowledge of native plants and remedies. As the dust settled, Abigail continued her journey. The path began its descent into the canyon, and the temperature dropped several degrees in the shade of the rock walls. She could hear the spring before she saw it, the gentle trickle of water over stone that had carved this refuge over countless years. This place held a special significance for her beyond its practical purpose. It was here that she felt closest to something larger than her circumscribed life, something wild and enduring that couldn't be controlled or owned. The spring pool was clear and cold, fed by an underground source that never failed even in the driest years. Abigail set down her yoke and buckets, taking a moment to splash water on her face and arms. The coolness was a blessing against her sun-heated skin. She cupped her hands and drank deeply, tasting the minerals that gave the water its slightly metallic flavor. As she filled the first bucket, she noticed fresh tracks in the mud near the water's edge. Deer, rabbits, and the distinctive pad marks of a coyote. All of God's creatures came here to drink. Predator and prey, observing an unspoken truce at this life-giving source. She'd seen them sometimes in the early morning or late evening hours. A doe with her fawn, a family of javelinas, once even a mountain lion that regarded her with intelligent yellow eyes before melting back into the shadows. The buckets full. Abigail struggled to lift the yoke back onto her shoulders. The return journey was always harder, the weight of the water turning her legs to trembling pillars by the time she reached home. But she'd grown strong over the years, her body adapting to the demands placed upon it just as surely as the desert plants adapted to their environment. On the way back, she stopped at her secret place, a small overhang in the canyon wall where she'd discovered a shallow cave. Inside, hidden beneath a pile of stones, were her few treasures: a blue glass bottle her mother had owned, 3 smooth river rocks with interesting patterns, a hawk feather, and a small leather pouch containing seeds from the various healing plants she'd learned to identify. This cache represented her true self, the part that her relatives could never touch or destroy. By the time she reached the outskirts of town, the sun had climbed higher and the heat shimmered off the hard-packed earth in waves. Her shoulders ached beneath the yoke, and blisters had formed where her worn shoes rubbed against her heels. But she didn't slow her pace, knowing that tardiness would only bring more trouble. As she approached their dwelling, she saw her uncle's horse was gone. Likely he'd headed to the saloon for his daily communion with the bottle. Her aunt would be in a fouler mood because of it, taking out her frustrations on the only target available. Abigail steeled herself for whatever awaited inside. Martha stood at the stove, stirring a pot of beans with violent motions. "Took you long enough," she spat without turning around. "Pour half in the kitchen barrel and the rest in the wash basin. Then you can start on the laundry." Abigail complied wordlessly, her movements efficient despite her exhaustion. As she worked, she thought of the spring, of the cool water and the animal tracks, of the brief moments of peace she'd stolen for herself. These small freedoms were what kept her spirit from breaking entirely, what allowed her to endure each day with the hope that somehow, someday, her life might change. Through the window, she could see heat lightning flickering on the horizon, promising storms that might or might not materialize. The desert was like that, full of promises and betrayals, beauty and brutality existing side by side. As she plunged her hands into the wash basin, beginning the endless cycle of scrubbing and wringing, Abigail held tight to the memory of standing free beside the spring, just a girl in the vast sky, momentarily unbound from the narrow confines of her existence. Tomorrow would bring another dawn, another trek to Raven's Hollow, another day of invisibility and servitude, but for now, in the secret chambers of her heart, she carried the taste of cool water and the sight of animal tracks in the mud, proof that life persisted even in the harshest places, that freedom existed even if she could only glimpse it in stolen moments between the demands of survival. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as Abigail made her way along the familiar path to Raven's Hollow. 3 days had passed since a summer storm had blessed them with rain. and already the desert had swallowed every drop, leaving only the memory of moisture in the cracked earth. She adjusted the wooden yoke across her shoulders, the empty bucket swaying with each step. Something felt different today. The usual morning sounds, the chirping of cactus wrens, the rustle of lizards in the brush seemed muted, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Abigail had learned to trust these instincts, honed by years of solitary walks where awareness meant the difference between safety and danger. As she descended into the canyon, a new scent caught her attention. It was faint at first, carried on the slight breeze that funneled through the rock walls, but unmistakable to anyone who'd lived on the frontier. The metallic tang of blood. Fresh blood. Her steps slowed, every nerve suddenly alert. It could be an injured animal, perhaps a deer brought down by a mountain lion. But something in the quality of the silence made her skin prickle with unease. She set down the yoke carefully, avoiding any sound that might announce her presence, and crept forward along the canyon wall. The scent grew stronger as she neared the spring. Through a gap in the rocks, she could see the pool of clear water, and beside it, a dark shape that didn't belong to the landscape. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a man, lying motionless on the sandy bank, one arm trailing in the water. For a long moment, Abigail remained frozen, her mind racing through possibilities. The sensible thing would be to turn back, to run home and pretend she'd seen nothing. People who got involved in violence rarely came out unscathed, and a young woman alone had even more reason for caution. But something held her in place, perhaps the memory of her mother's compassionate nature, or simply the human inability to turn away from another's suffering. Slowly, carefully, she emerged from her hiding spot and approached the fallen figure. As she drew closer, details became clear that made her stomach tighten with a different kind of fear. The man's skin was bronze in the filtered sunlight. His long black hair spread around his head like spilled ink. He wore buckskin leggings and a torn shirt that might once have been white. An Apache. Even in her isolated life, she'd heard the stories. Raids on settlements, soldiers hunting war parties, the escalating cycle of violence that marked the uneasy relationship between the Apache people and the white settlers who'd claimed their land. The man's breathing was shallow and labored. A dark stain spread across his side where something, a knife or perhaps a bullet, had found its mark. His face, despite the pallor of blood loss, held a fierce beauty that spoke of pride and strength even in unconsciousness. She guessed he was perhaps 10 years older than herself, though it was hard to tell with certainty. Abigail found herself moving forward despite her fear. Her mother's voice seemed to whisper in her memory, reminding her that healing hands knew no distinction between friend and enemy. She knelt beside him, careful not to disturb his position, and examined the wound as best she could without touching him. The bleeding had slowed, but not stopped. Without treatment, he would die here by the spring, his life seeping into the sand. The practical part of her mind cataloged what she would need: yarrow to stop the bleeding, willow bark for fever, clean cloth for bandages, all things she could find. But it would mean making a choice that could destroy her already precarious existence. As if sensing her presence, the man's eyes fluttered open. They were dark as the deepest parts of the canyon, and for a moment, they held only confusion. Then awareness sharpened them, and his body tensed despite his weakness. His hand moved slightly, perhaps reaching for a weapon that was no longer there. "Don't move," Abigail said softly, raising her hands to show they were empty. "You're hurt bad." His eyes tracked to her face, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she held his gaze, letting him see that she meant no harm. Something in his expression shifted. Not trust exactly, but a recognition that she posed no immediate threat. He tried to speak, but only a harsh rasp emerged. Abigail reached for her water gourd. Another breach of the careful distance she'd been taught to maintain. "Water," she said, miming drinking. "You need water." She supported his head carefully, helping him take small sips, the intimate act of holding a stranger, feeling the weight of his head in her hands. and the fever heat radiating from his skin sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. When he'd drunk what he could, she lowered him back gently. "Who did this?" she asked, though she didn't expect an answer. The possibilities were numerous: soldiers, bounty hunters, rival Apache bands, or simply men who killed for sport or profit. The frontier was full of violence looking for an excuse. He watched her with those dark eyes, and she sensed he understood more than he could express. His lips moved again, forming a single word that she leaned closer to hear. "Tonek," he whispered, and she realized he was telling her his name. "Tonek," she repeated, and something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, that she would speak it back to him. "I'm Abigail. I can help you, but I need to get supplies. Medicine plants. Can you understand?" A slight nod was his only response, but it was enough. Abigail's mind raced through the logistics. She couldn't bring him to town. He'd be killed on sight or turned over to the army. Her home was equally impossible, but she knew of a place. "There's a cave," she said, gesturing up the canyon wall. "Hidden, safe, but you have to move. Can you try?" The doubt in his eyes matched her own. He was weak from blood loss, and the cave, while not far, required climbing over rough terrain, but staying here meant certain death, either from his wounds or from whoever might come looking for him. With effort that made sweat bead on his forehead, Tonek pushed himself up on one elbow. Abigail moved to support him, her small frame straining under his weight. Together, through a combination of determination and desperation, they managed to get him to his feet. The journey to the cave was a torture of small movements and frequent stops. More than once, Abigail thought he would collapse entirely, but somehow he kept moving, driven by a will to survive that she recognized in herself. By the time they reached the hidden entrance, both were exhausted and covered in dust and blood. The cave was small but dry, with a sandy floor and walls that held the coolness of the earth. Abigail had discovered it years ago, and sometimes came here to escape the worst of the summer heat. Now it would serve a different purpose. She helped him settle against the back wall, then quickly gathered what she could find nearby: soft grass for a crude bed, stones to hide the entrance better. "I'll be back," she promised, "with medicine, food. Don't try to leave." He caught her wrist as she turned to go, his grip weak but insistent. In his eyes, she saw a complex mix of emotions: gratitude, suspicion, resignation. He spoke again, a full sentence in his own language that she couldn't understand but whose meaning seemed clear. "Why are you doing this?" "I don't know," she answered honestly. "But my mother taught me that every life has value, even those we're told are our enemies." She left him there, hurrying back to the spring to fill her buckets. Her mind worked furiously as she walked home, planning her next moves. She would need to be careful, to take only what wouldn't be missed, to return without arousing suspicion. The yarrow grew near the old mine. The willow bark could be gathered by the creek bed. Cloth would be harder. Perhaps she could tear strips from her own spare dress. As she approached town, Abigail forced herself to adopt her usual demeanor, the invisible girl who spoke only when spoken to, who moved through her days like a ghost. But inside, everything had changed. For the first time in her life, she held a secret that was truly her own, a purpose beyond mere survival. She'd saved a life today, or at least begun to try. The wounded Apache warrior hidden in her cave represented danger beyond anything she'd known, but also possibility. In choosing to help him, she'd stepped outside the narrow boundaries of her existence, claimed an agency that her relatives had tried to beat out of her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new risks, but as she poured water into the kitchen barrel under her aunt's watchful glare, Abigail felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope, not for rescue or escape, but for the simple human connection forged in a moment of desperate need. Proof that compassion could bloom even in the harshest ground. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the desert floor as Abigail carefully made her way back toward the hidden cave. Her apron pockets bulged with yarrow leaves and willow bark, gathered during what her aunt believed was a trip to collect kindling. Beneath her arm, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth, were strips of fabric torn from her spare dress and a small portion of cornbread she'd managed to save from her own meager lunch. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she navigated the familiar path with unfamiliar purpose. Every sound made her freeze. Was that footsteps behind her, or merely the echo of her own? The weight of her secret pressed down on her shoulders more heavily than any water yoke. As she approached the cave entrance, she called out softly, not wanting to startle a wounded man who might react defensively. "It's Abigail. I've brought medicine." No response came from within the shadowed opening. Fear gripped her stomach. Had he died while she was gone? Had someone found him? Or worse, had he been strong enough to leave, potentially leading others back to her? She ducked through the entrance, letting her eyes adjust to the dimness. Relief flooded through her as she saw him still propped against the far wall, though his stillness worried her. Moving closer, she could see the rise and fall of his chest, hear the ragged rhythm of his breathing. "Tonek." She knelt beside him, noting how fever had already begun to claim him. His skin burned beneath her tentative touch, and when his eyes opened, they held the glassy sheen of delirium. He muttered something in Apache, his voice thick with pain and confusion. Though she couldn't understand the words, she recognized the universal language of suffering. Without hesitation, she set about her work, drawing on every memory of her mother's teachings. First, she needed to clean the wound properly. Using water from her gourd and the cleanest cloth strips, she gently washed away the dried blood and dirt. The wound was deep but clean-edged, a knife rather than a bullet, which was fortunate. Bullets left fragments that festered and killed. Tonek flinched as she worked, his jaw clenched against the pain. Once, his hand shot out and gripped her wrist with surprising strength. Their eyes met, and in that moment, she saw past his warrior's facade to the vulnerable human beneath. Fear, pain, and something else, a wondering trust that seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she knew he might not understand. "This will help, I promise." She crushed the yarrow leaves between her palms, releasing their pungent scent, then packed them carefully against the wound. Her mother had shown her this technique years ago, explaining how the plant helped stop bleeding and prevent the bad spirits that caused infection. Next came the willow bark tea. She'd have to build a small fire to brew it properly. But first, she needed to finish dressing the wound. As she wrapped the cloth strips around his torso, she became acutely aware of their closeness. She'd never been this near to any man outside her family, let alone one whose very presence violated every social boundary she'd been taught. His chest was marked with scars that told stories of previous battles survived, and despite his current weakness, there was a coiled strength in his frame that spoke of a life lived in constant motion and danger. "You're a warrior," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "How many fights have you survived before this one?" His eyes tracked to her face, and for a moment, the fever seemed to recede. He spoke again, a single word that sounded like a question. She wished desperately that she could understand, could offer more than these fumbling ministrations. Using dried grass and small twigs, she built a tiny fire near the cave entrance, careful to keep it small enough that the smoke would dissipate before rising above the canyon walls. The familiar ritual of brewing medicine tea brought her a measure of calm. This she knew how to do, had done countless times for her aunt's headaches or her uncle's morning-after miseries. When the tea was ready, she helped Tonek drink, supporting his head as she had at the spring. He grimaced at the bitter taste, but swallowed obediently. Between sips, she offered him small pieces of the cornbread, which he accepted with obvious hunger. As the afternoon wore on, she found herself talking to fill the silence, knowing he couldn't understand but needing to voice the thoughts that had been building inside her all day. I don't know why I'm doing this, she admitted, checking his bandages again. If anyone finds out, well, it won't be good for either of us. My uncle would sell you to the army for bounty money without blinking. My aunt would have me whipped for bringing shame on them, though Lord knows they've brought enough shame on themselves. Tonek watched her with those dark eyes, and she could almost imagine he understood. The fever had brought a flush to his cheeks, but he seemed more alert than before, whether from the medicine or simply the presence of another human being. My mother would have helped you, she continued, settling back on her heels. She had Apache friends once, before the troubles got so bad. She learned some of your medicine ways, mixed them with what her own mother taught her. People in town whispered about it, called her an Indian lover. Maybe that's why they barely mourned when the fever took her. She reached out unconsciously to adjust the bandage, and he caught her hand again. This time, instead of the desperate grip of pain, his touch was gentle. He turned her palm upward, tracing the calluses there with one finger, acknowledging the hard life written on her skin. Then he placed her hand on his chest, over his heart, and spoke a word that needed no translation. Thank you. Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes. When was the last time anyone had thanked her for anything she couldn't remember? In her world, service was expected, demanded, never acknowledged. You're welcome, she whispered. A sound from outside made them both freeze, the clatter of rocks disturbed by passing feet. Abigail's blood turned to ice. She pressed a finger to her lips, then crept to the cave entrance, peering carefully around the edge. Relief and dread warred within her as she recognized the figure picking its way along the canyon floor. Samuel Morrison, the sheriff's deputy, was known for his tracking skills and his particular hatred of Apaches. His brother had been killed in a raid 3 years ago, and he'd made it his mission to hunt down every savage he could find. She watched as he examined the ground near the spring, no doubt reading the signs of struggle she hadn't thought to obscure. Her mind raced. If he followed the trail to the cave, making a desperate decision, she stepped out into the open, affecting surprise. Deputy Morrison, you startled me. He spun toward her, hand moving instinctively to his gun before recognizing her. Abigail, Mercy, what are you doing out here? Gathering plants, she said, indicating her depleted pockets. My aunt's been poorly. The herbs help with her stomach troubles. Morrison's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Seen anyone else out here? We're tracking an Apache who killed a settler family 2 days ago. Wounded him good, but he got away. The lie came bitter to her tongue. A family killed. Was it true, or just another story to justify violence either way? She had made her choice. No, sir, just me and the lizards. He studied her for a long moment, and she forced herself to meet his gaze with the vacant expression she'd perfected over years of survival. Finally, he spat tobacco juice onto the sand. You be careful, girl. That savage is dangerous. You see anything unusual? You come tell me right away. Here. Yes, sir. She waited until he'd moved further down the canyon before slipping back into the cave. Tonek's eyes were alert, questioning. He'd heard everything, understood the danger, even if not the words. He's gone, she assured him. But he's looking for you, says you killed a family. Something shifted in his expression, not guilt exactly, but a deep weariness. He shook his head slightly, then winced at the movement, with obvious effort. He mimed sleeping, then held up 3 fingers. 3 people sleeping. Then he made a cutting motion across his throat and pointed to himself, shaking his head emphatically. Finally, he pointed to where his weapons would have been, mimed them being taken. You didn't kill them, Abigail interpreted. Someone else did. Took your weapons to make it look like you. He nodded, relief flickering across his features that she understood. Not that it mattered what she believed, the town had already decided his guilt. But somehow, it mattered to him that she knew the truth. The shadows were lengthening, and she knew she had to go. Her absence would be noticed soon, and questions would be asked that she couldn't answer. But leaving him here, wounded and hunted, felt like abandoning a part of herself she'd just discovered. "I'll come back," she promised. "Tomorrow, with more food and medicine. You need to rest. Let the fever break. Don't try to leave. They're searching everywhere." She gathered her things, doused the small fire. As she turned to go, he called out softly. When she looked back, he'd managed to pull something from inside his shirt. A small carved wooden bird, no bigger than her thumb. He held it out to her, insistent despite his weakness. She took it wonderingly, feeling the smooth wood warm from his body heat. It was beautifully made, each feather detailed with careful knife strokes. An eagle, she realized, proud and free. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "But I can't." He closed her fingers around it, speaking earnestly in his own language. She didn't need to understand the words to grasp the meaning. This was important to him, this exchange of trust, this small gift that acknowledged what she'd risked for him. "Thank you," she said again, tucking the carving carefully into her deepest pocket. "Rest now. Heal. I'll see you tomorrow." As she made her way home through the gathering dusk, the wooden eagle seemed to pulse with warmth against her hip. Everything had changed in the span of a single afternoon. She'd harbored a fugitive, lied to the law, and received her first real gift in 7 years of servitude. But more than that, she'd discovered that her capacity for courage and compassion had survived despite every attempt to beat it out of her. In choosing to help Tonek, she'd chosen to honor the best parts of herself, the parts her mother had nurtured, the parts that made her more than just a servant girl in a harsh land. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new challenges. But tonight, as she prepared to face her aunt's harsh words and her uncle's drunken ravings, she carried with her the memory of dark eyes filled with gratitude and a carved eagle that spoke of freedom. For the first time in years, she had something that belonged only to her, a secret, a purpose, and perhaps the beginning of something that might grow into more than either of them could imagine. The third night of Tonek's fever was the worst. Abigail sat beside him in the cave, lit only by a single candle she'd risked bringing from home, watching sweat bead on his forehead as his body fought against infection. She'd been coming twice daily now, slipping away during her water runs and inventing errands that took her past the old mine where medicinal plants grew. His breathing came in shallow gasps, and more than once she feared she'd lost him. But each time his chest would rise again, and she'd whisper encouragements he couldn't understand, bathing his burning skin with cool water and spooning willow bark tea between his cracked lips. "My mother used to sing when she tended the sick," Abigail murmured, wringing out the cloth again. "She said the spirit needed comfort as much as the body." I wish I remembered the words. Instead, she found herself humming an old melody, something from before her parents died, when lullaby still existed in her world. To her surprise, Tonek's restless movements stilled slightly. His eyes opened, focused on her face with an intensity that made her heart skip. He spoke, voice hoarse but clearer than it had been in days. The Apache words meant nothing to her, but she heard her name among them. He'd been listening, remembering. Then he lifted one hand weakly, gesturing to continue the song. So she hummed, and gradually began to remember fragments of words. "Sleep now, little bird, safe in your nest. Morning will come with the sun's caress." Simple words, perhaps foolish to sing to a grown warrior, but his eyes drifted closed peacefully, and his breathing deepened. Through that long night, she maintained her vigil. When his fever spiked, she cooled him with damp cloths. When chills racked his body, she covered him with the blanket she'd smuggled from her own bed. She fed him spoonfuls of broth made from rabbits she'd trapped, crushed healing herbs between her fingers to release their essence, and talked to fill the silence. "I've been thinking," she said softly, checking his bandages, "about why someone would frame you for those murders. Deputy Morrison seems awful certain it was you." But he's always been quick to blame your people for everything. Last winter, when the Jacobsons' cattle went missing, he swore it was an Apache raid. Turned out Tom Bradley had sold them to pay gambling debts. Tonek's eyes flickered open again, watching her steadily. She'd grown comfortable with these one-sided conversations, finding freedom in speaking thoughts she'd never dared voice before. There's been talk in town about forcing all the Apache onto reservations, taking the last of the good hunting grounds. Some folks stand to get rich if that happens. Maybe someone figured starting a new round of violence would help their cause. He made a sound that might have been agreement, then gestured weakly toward his side. She understood. He wanted to show her something. Carefully, she helped him shift position, and he indicated a hidden pocket in his leggings. Inside, she found a small leather pouch decorated with beadwork. With trembling fingers, he opened it and withdrew something that made her gasp. A cavalry button, the kind worn by army officers. But this one was bent and blackened, as if it had been in a fire. He pressed it into her hand, then made the sleeping gesture again, the throat-cutting motion, and pointed to the button. "Soldiers," she breathed. "Soldiers killed that family." He nodded grimly, then touched the bandage at his side and pointed to the button again. The same ones who'd wounded him. The implications made her stomach turn. Someone in the army was committing murders and blaming the Apache, trying to start a war that would justify taking the last free lands. "We have to tell someone," she said, then immediately realized the futility of it. No. Who would believe us, an Apache and an orphan girl, against the word of soldiers? Tonek reached out and covered her hand with his. The button pressed between their palms. He spoke again, earnestly, and though she couldn't understand the words, she felt their weight. This evidence was important. Lives depended on it, his people's lives. As dawn approached, his fever finally broke. She watched with relief as natural sleep claimed him, his breathing deep and even. The crisis had passed. He would live. But what came next? She couldn't keep sneaking away forever. Already her aunt had commented acidly on her frequent absences, and her uncle had begun watching her with bloodshot eyes that held unwelcome speculation. The wooden eagle carving lived in her pocket, a constant reminder of the secret that grew heavier each day. Over the following days, as Tonek's strength slowly returned, their communication improved. He learned simple English words: water, food, pain, good. She picked up fragments of Apache Gawa fire, Beso money, do know. They developed a language of gestures and expressions that transcended words. She learned that he'd been traveling to meet with a peace delegation when the soldiers ambushed him, that he had a sister who would be wondering what had become of him, that the eagle carving was something he'd made for his nephew but wanted her to have for saving his life. "Shika," he said one evening, touching his chest and then pointing to her. When she looked confused, he tried again. "You, Shika, family." The word lodged in her heart like an arrow. Family. She'd had no true family since her parents died, just keepers who saw her as a burden. But this man, this supposed enemy, called her family for showing basic human kindness. "Tonek is my family too," she replied softly, and was rewarded with the first real smile she'd seen from him. A transformation that made him look years younger despite the healing wounds. But their borrowed time was running out. His strength was returning. Soon he'd be well enough to travel. And the search parties hadn't given up. Just yesterday, she'd overheard Morrison in the general store, swearing they'd find that murdering savage if they had to turn over every rock in the territory. That night, she brought disturbing news. They're bringing in a tracker from Fort Buchanan, someone who knows Apache signs better than anyone. He'll be here in 2 days. Tonek's face hardened. They both knew what this meant. He had to leave, whether fully healed or not. To stay meant certain death, and possibly danger for her as well. "Tomorrow night," he said, the English words careful but clear. "I go. Your wound. Strong enough." He caught her hand, held it firmly. "You come." The question hung between them like morning mist. Come with him. Leave the only life she'd known, harsh as it was, for the uncertainty of life among his people. A white girl with the Apache, it was madness. And yet, I can't, she whispered, though the words tasted like ashes. They'd hunt us both. Your people would never accept me. And I'm not brave enough. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, and she realized she'd been crying. Brave, he said firmly, touching the place over her heart. More brave than warriors. They spent that last night in careful preparation. She brought him a map torn from one of her uncle's books, showing the locations of water sources and settlements to avoid. He showed her which plants could be used for healing if the ones she knew weren't available. They worked in companionable silence, aware that each moment brought their parting closer. As dawn approached on what would be their last morning together, Tonek pressed something else into her hands. A necklace made of small turquoise beads with a wooden eagle as a pendant. He'd worked on it during his convalescence, combining her gift back to her with something of his own. Remember, he said, touching the eagle, you fly free here. He touched her heart. Always. She helped him stand, noting with mixed pride and sorrow how much steadier he was now. Together they made their way to the cave entrance, where the pre-dawn air carried the scent of sage and possibility. Which way will you go? She asked, though she knew he wouldn't tell her. Safer for them both if she didn't know. Instead of answering, he cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. I come back, he said, the words fierce with promise. When safe, I find you. I'll be here, she replied, meaning it. Same as always. The invisible girl at Raven's Hollow. No, he corrected, pressing the eagle pendant against her chest. Sheikah, family, never invisible. He kissed her forehead, a blessing and a farewell, then slipped away into the gray light. She watched until the desert swallowed him, until she couldn't distinguish his form from the shadows of saguaro and stone. Only then did she allow herself to sink to her knees and weep, for the connection found and lost, for the choice made and unmade, for the piece of her heart walking away into danger. When she finally returned home, the eagle pendant hidden beneath her dress, she found her aunt waiting with a face like thunder and words like weapons, but even as harsh words rained down on her, Abigail held tight to the warmth of the turquoise against her skin and the memory of dark eyes calling her family. She'd saved a life. She'd been seen, truly seen. For the first time in years, and somewhere out in the vast desert, a warrior carried with him the knowledge that not all whites were his enemy, just as she carried the knowledge that not all Apache were the monsters of campfire tales. It wasn't the ending she might have wished for in the lonely hours of night, but it was a beginning, a promise, a seed planted in hostile ground that might, with patience and hope, someday bloom into something neither of them could imagine. The invisible girl at Raven's Hollow had become something more, keeper of secrets, bridge between worlds, and most importantly, Sheikah, family, and family. She'd learned, always found a way back to each other. The desert dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold as Tonek opened his eyes to find Abigail's face hovering above him, her gray eyes wide with concern. The fever that had gripped him for 3 days had finally broken in the night, leaving him weak but clear-headed for the first time since she'd found him by the spring. You're awake, she breathed, relief evident in every line of her face. Really awake this time. He tried to speak, but his throat felt like sand. She quickly brought water to his lips, supporting his head with practiced gentleness. The cool liquid was life itself, and he drank deeply before finding his voice. How long? 4 days since I found you, she replied, settling back on her heels. Your fever was bad. I thought... She trailed off, but he could read the rest in her expression. She'd thought he would die. Memory returned in fragments. The ambush, the knife finding his side, stumbling through the desert knowing that to stop was to die. And then her face, pale and frightened but determined, an unexpected angel in his darkest hour. "You stayed," he said wonderingly. It wasn't a question but a statement of amazement. This white girl, who should have run screaming or fetched the soldiers, had instead risked everything to save him. "My mother taught me that every life is sacred," Abigail said simply. "Even," she caught herself, color rising in her cheeks. "Even Apache life," he finished gently. "It is good. Your mother was wise woman." As the morning progressed, he watched her move about the small cave with quiet efficiency, checking his bandages, preparing more medicine tea, all while telling him about the search parties combing the desert. Her voice was soothing, and he found himself studying her face, thin from hardship, but holding a strength that went beyond physical endurance. "Why do you help me?" he asked when she paused in her ministrations. "Your people would punish you." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently touching something in her pocket. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be seen as less than human," she finally said. "To have people look right through you like you don't exist. When I saw you by the spring, hurt and alone, I couldn't just walk away." Tonek felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with his wound. This girl understood suffering in a way that transcended the boundaries between their peoples. He'd been prepared to die believing all whites were enemies, but here was proof that humanity could bloom in unexpected places. "What is your name?" he asked, realizing he didn't know this most basic thing about his savior. "Abigail. Abigail Mercy." She smiled sadly. "Though there's been precious little mercy in my life since my parents died." "Abigail," he repeated carefully, testing the unfamiliar sounds. Then, touching his chest, "I am Tonek. It means one who still breathes," she finished, surprising him. "You told me during your fever. You said many things." Concern flickered through him. What secrets might he have revealed in his delirium? But her expression held only gentle understanding, no fear or judgment. As the day wore on, they developed a rhythm of communication that mixed words, gestures, and shared silence. She told him about her life in Dry Hollow, the uncle who drank away his sorrows and anger, the aunt who saw her as nothing more than free labor. He spoke of his people, his sister White Dove who would be sick with worry, the increasing pressure from soldiers and settlers pushing them from their ancestral lands. "They want war," he said, frustration evident despite his weakness. "Some whites, some Apache too. They feed on hate like vultures on death." "Is that why they framed you for those murders?" Abigail asked. "To start more fighting." He nodded grimly. "I go to meet peace chiefs. Someone not want peace. They kill family, take my knife to leave with bodies, shoot me when I try to stop." His hand went unconsciously to his side. "Make all Apache look guilty." But who would do such a thing? Tonek's expression darkened. Men who profit from war, traders who sell weapons, soldiers who want glory, men who want Apache land for gold, silver, cattle. The truth of it sat heavy between them. How many times had such deceptions sparked violence that consumed innocent lives on both sides? How many deaths could be traced back to the greed of a few? "I wish I could help," Abigail said softly. "But who would listen to me? I'm nobody." "No," Tonek said firmly, catching her hand. "You are." He searched for the English words. "How you say, light in darkness, hope finder." "A beacon," she suggested, and he nodded eagerly. "Yes, beacon. You save enemy. Risk all for stranger. This is—" He touched his chest, over his heart. "This is great spirit. Holy thing." Tears gathered in her eyes at his words. When was the last time anyone had seen value in her beyond her ability to fetch water and scrub floors? But this man, this warrior from another world, looked at her and saw something precious. As sunset approached, painting the cave walls in warm, amber light. Tonek knew his time here was ending. His strength was returning, and each day he stayed increased the danger for them both. But the thought of leaving filled him with an unexpected reluctance. "I must go soon," he said quietly. "When moon is dark, 3 days." Abigail's face fell, though she quickly tried to hide it. "Of course. You need to get back to your people. Your sister must be so worried." "Yes." But even as he agreed, he found himself memorizing her face, the way she tucked that stubborn strand of hair behind her ear, the determined set of her chin, the kindness that radiated from her despite all the hardship she'd endured. On impulse, he pulled the eagle carving from his pouch. He'd made it for his nephew's naming ceremony, but somehow it seemed meant for her. "For you," he said, pressing it into her palm. "Eagle flies high, sees far, like you see beyond hate to human heart." She cradled the small wooden bird like it was made of gold. "It's beautiful, but I have nothing to give you in return." "You give life," he reminded her, "is enough, more than enough." But she shook her head, reaching up to unfasten something from around her neck. It was a simple leather cord holding a small, smooth Stone River jade by the look of it, worn smooth by years of handling. "This was my mother's," she said, placing it over his head. "She said it carried protection and wisdom. I want you to have it." The stone settled against his chest, still warm from her skin. He closed his hand over it, feeling the weight of her trust, the preciousness of the gift, among his people. Such exchanges created bonds that went beyond words or time. "Now we are—" He searched for the right words in English, then gave up and spoke in Apache. "Niltse go nanita, bound by gift, bound by spirit." What does that mean? He thought carefully how to translate. "It means we are connected now. Not blood family, but chosen family, spirit family. You understand." "Shika," she said softly, remembering the word he'd taught her. "Family. Yes, you are my Shika now. Abigail, always." The declaration hung between them, profound and irreversible. Whatever happened next, wherever their paths led, they had created something that neither distance nor danger could break. Outside, a coyote called to the rising moon, and the desert settled into its nighttime symphony. Inside the cave, 2 people from different worlds sat in companionable silence, each wearing the other's gift, each carrying in their heart the knowledge that understanding was possible even across the deepest divides. "Tell me about your sister," Abigail said eventually. "What's she like?" Tonek smiled, the expression transforming his stern features. "White Dove is, how you say, stubborn like mule, but gentle like butterfly. She heal people, like you. She will like you very much. You think we'll meet someday?" The question carried more weight than its simple words suggested. To meet White Dove meant crossing fully into his world, leaving behind everything she knew. He saw the fear and longing war in her expression. "Maybe," he said carefully, "when peace comes, when safe for you." They talked until the candle burned low, sharing stories and dreams, building a bridge of words across the chasm of their differences. She taught him English phrases. He showed her Apache signs for danger and safety. They laughed quietly over his pronunciation of particularly difficult words, and he teased her gently about her serious expression when concentrating. It was, Tonek realized with surprise, one of the most peaceful evenings he'd ever spent, here in this hidden cave, wounded and hunted. He'd found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. A connection that transcended tribe or race. A meeting of souls that recognized each other despite every reason they shouldn't. As Abigail prepared to leave for the night, he caught her hand one more time. "Thank you," he said in careful English. "For seeing man, not Apache. For being friend, not enemy." She squeezed his fingers gently. "Thank you for trusting me, for showing me I'm more than just the invisible girl." "Never invisible to me," he promised. "I carry you here, He touched his heart. Then the stone she'd given him. Always. She left him then, slipping away into the darkness with promises to return at dawn. Tonek settled back against the cave wall, his hand wrapped around the river jade, his thoughts full of gray eyes and gentle hands and the miracle of human kindness in a harsh world. 3 more days. 3 more days to heal, to memorize her voice, to store up these moments of peace before returning to the uncertainty and danger of his life. But something had changed within him. The wound in his side would heal and fade, but the mark she'd left on his spirit would remain forever, a reminder that even in the darkest times, light could be found in the most unexpected places. The eagle carving was now hers, and with it a piece of his heart. He touched the jade stone and smiled. Perhaps the Great Spirit had guided him to that spring for reasons beyond his understanding. Perhaps some connections were written in the stars long before the people involved knew to look up and read them. Whatever the future held, he would face it knowing that somewhere in the vast desert, a young woman carried his gift and his promise, Sheikah, family, forever. The morning after Tonek's departure felt like waking from a dream into a nightmare. Abigail moved through her chores mechanically, the eagle pendant hidden beneath her dress a constant reminder of the changed world she now inhabited. Every sound made her heart race. Had someone discovered the cave? Had they captured him? It was while drawing water from the kitchen barrel that disaster struck. The frayed leather cord holding Tonek's gift snapped, sending the wooden eagle and turquoise beads clattering across the floor. She dropped to her knees, scrambling to gather them. But it was too late. "What's this?" Her Uncle Jeremiah's boot came down near her reaching fingers, his bloodshot eyes focused with unusual clarity on the native jewelry. "Where'd you get Indian trinkets? Girl." I found them," she stammered, clutching the pieces protectively. "By the old mine. They must have been there for years." His backhand caught her across the cheek, sending her sprawling. "Liar! These beads are new made. You've been meeting with them savages." Martha appeared in the doorway, her face twisted with suspicion and something else, a calculating look that sent chills down Abigail's spine. "Indians. Jeremiah. The girl's been consorting with Indians." "Looks like it." He grabbed Abigail's arm, hauling her to her feet. "You know there's been Apache troubles. That killer they're hunting. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "No, I swear, I just found—" But Martha had noticed something else. She yanked at Abigail's sleeve, revealing the healing scratches from gathering medicine plants. "These are fresh marks. And look, there's blood on this hem." "Not her blood, neither." The two exchanged glances, and Abigail saw her fate being decided in that wordless communication. Her uncle's grip tightened painfully. "Please," she whispered. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Haven't done anything?" Martha's voice rose shrilly. "Sneaking around with murderous heathens, bringing shame on this household, risking all our lives after we took you in, fed you, gave you a roof." "You know what this means," Jeremiah said slowly, and there was something in his tone that made Abigail's blood run cold. "That Apache they're hunting, there's a bounty, $200, and if they think she's been helping him, they'll want to question her," Martha finished. "Might even think we knew about it, could lose everything." Abigail watched the greedy calculation in their eyes and understood. They weren't just going to punish her, they were going to profit from her. Unless— Jeremiah stroked his stubbled chin. "Silas Roke's been asking after her. Wants a wife to cook and clean at his trading post out in the territories. Offered $25 gold." Silas Roke. Even Martha looked uncertain. "He's a hard man. Jeremiah, they say he's a man who knows how to handle troublesome women." Jeremiah cut her off. "And he won't ask questions about her past if the price is right. Better than having the law come down on us." "No," Abigail breathed, horror flooding through her. She'd heard whispers about Silas Roke, a man who traded with both soldiers and outlaws, who boasted of his Apache scalps, whose previous wife had died under mysterious circumstances. "Please, I'll do anything. You'll do exactly what you're told, Martha snapped. Jeremiah, ride to the trading post. Tell Roke he can have her for $20 and our silence about her Indian lover. She might even know where that Apache's heading. I swear I don't know anything. But Jeremiah was already reaching for his hat. Lock her in the root cellar. Don't want her running off before Roke gets here. They dragged her to the small dugout behind the house, shoving her down the wooden steps into the musty darkness. The door slammed shut, the bar dropping into place with a finality that echoed in her bones. Abigail sank onto the dirt floor. Tonek's broken necklace still clutched in her fist. The walls seemed to press in, the earthy smell suffocating. How had everything gone so wrong so quickly just hours ago? She'd been filled with bittersweet hope, carrying the promise of family and connection. Now, she forced herself to think. Roke would come, probably by nightfall. Once he had her, she'd disappear into the wilderness, another casualty of the frontier's brutal arithmetic. And if he forced her to reveal information about Tonek, no, she wouldn't betray him, no matter what Roke did. But how to escape the cellar was solid built, meant to store preserves and protect against Apache raids. The door was barred from outside, the ventilation gaps too small for anything larger than a snake. Hours passed in the darkness. She heard her uncle's horse leave, then return, heard voices, Martha's shrill tones mixing with a deeper, rougher voice that made her skin crawl. Silas Roke had arrived. Heavy footsteps approached the cellar. The bar lifted, and harsh sunlight flooded in, making her squint. Roke's bulk filled the doorway, a mountain of a man with cold gray eyes and a beard stained yellow from tobacco. So this is the Apache lover, he drawled, descending the steps. Pretty little thing. Your uncle says you've been helping that murdering savage everyone's hunting. I don't know what you're talking about. His hand shot out, gripping her chin painfully. Don't lie to me, girl. I can smell Indian on you. That's his blood on your dress, isn't it? His other hand fingered the torn fabric. You doctored him up good. Where's he heading? I don't know. The slap rocked her head back, stars exploding across her vision. Wrong answer. I track Apache for the army sometimes. Got me a reputation for making them talk. They're women, too. You want to test that reputation? Through the pain and fear, Abigail felt something harden inside her. The same resolve that had led her to save Tonek now steadied her voice. I found an injured man and gave him water. That's all. If that makes me guilty of something, then I'm guilty. But I don't know where he went. Roke studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was worse than his anger. Good, I like spirit in a woman. Makes breaking them more satisfying. He hauled her to her feet. Your uncle took my gold. So you're mine now. We'll have plenty of time to discuss your Apache friend on the trail. He bound her wrists with rawhide strips that cut into her skin, then pushed her up the steps. Martha watched from the doorway, not meeting Abigail's eyes. Jeremiah counted coins at the table, the clink of gold the only sound. Pleasure doing business, Roke said, throwing Abigail over his shoulder like a sack of grain. If that Apache shows up looking for her, you send word, there's bounty money in it for you. He won't come, Abigail said, her voice muffled but clear. He's long gone. You're wasting your time. Maybe so, Roke agreed, dumping her into his wagon among buffalo hides and trade goods. But men do foolish things for women, especially Apache bucks who think they own everything they touch. He marked you as his. Didn't he give you presents? He held up the broken necklace Martha had given him. They don't let go easy. As the wagon rolled away from the only home she'd known, Abigail clutched that small hope. Tonek was safe. He was smart, skilled, already miles away by now. Whatever happened to her, at least she'd managed that much. But as the miles passed and the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of blood, she couldn't shake the memory of his fierce promise, I come back. What if Roke was right? What if Tonek's honor, his sense of obligation to his Sheikah, brought him back into danger? The trading post appeared as darkness fell, a squat collection of buildings surrounded by a stake fence, isolated miles from any town. Roke's kingdom, where law was what he said it was and justice came from the barrel of a gun. "Home sweet home," he announced, cutting her bonds. "Try to run, and the desert will kill you if the Apaches don't. Try to fight, and you'll wish the desert had killed you. Understand?" She nodded, rubbing feeling back into her wrists. Around them, the night sounds of the desert rose like a chorus: coyotes, owls, the whisper of wind through sage. Somewhere out there, Tonek traveled toward his people. She'd endure whatever came next by holding to that truth. "Good girl," Roke said, shoving her toward the main building. "Now, let's discuss how you're going to help me collect that bounty. See, I figure your Apache buck won't stay gone, not with his woman in enemy hands. And when he comes," he patted the rifle slung over his shoulder, "$200 gold, plus whatever the army pays for Apache scalps these days." "I'm not his woman," Abigail said quietly, "and you're wrong about him coming back." But even as she spoke the words, her hand went instinctively to where the eagle pendant had rested against her heart. Sheikah, family, forever. Those weren't promises the Apache made lightly. Roke noticed the gesture and smiled again. "We'll see, girl, we'll see," as he locked her in a small storeroom that would serve as her prison. Abigail sank onto a pile of grain sacks. The broken necklace was gone, taken as evidence of her crime. But the memory of dark eyes and gentle hands remained, along with the knowledge that she'd chosen compassion over safety, humanity over prejudice. Whatever price she paid for that choice, she'd pay it without regret. She was Sheikah family to a warrior who saw her truly. That truth would sustain her through whatever darkness lay ahead. Outside, a hunting owl called across the desert, and she imagined it carrying a message on silent wings: "Be safe, stay away, let my sacrifice mean something." But in her heart, she knew Tonek would not abandon her any more than she had abandoned him. The bond between them, forged in a cave of healing and hope, was stronger than fear or distance or the hatred that divided their peoples. Roke thought he'd set a trap for an Apache warrior. What he'd actually done was test the power of an oath made in trust and sealed with gifts of the heart. Time would tell which proved stronger, his greed and cruelty, or the promise between two souls who had found family in the last place anyone would look for it. The moon hung like a silver coin in the desert sky as Tonek crouched on the ridge overlooking Roke's trading post. 3 weeks had passed since his departure from the cave. 3 weeks of healing with his people while the wound in his side closed and his strength returned. But another wound, invisible and deeper, had driven him back across the dangerous miles. Below him, 5 of his finest warriors waited in silence when he'd told them of the white woman who saved his life, who now suffered because of her kindness. They had volunteered without hesitation. This was a matter of honor that transcended the usual boundaries between their peoples. "She is there," whispered Broken Arrow, his keen eyes picking out movement in the lamp-lit windows. "The one who walks like a caged bird." Tonek's jaw tightened as he watched Abigail carry water from the well, her movements weary even at this distance, the rage that had simmered since he'd learned of her fate. Through careful scouting and trading post gossip, threatened to boil over, but this required strategy, not just strength. 4 guards, noted Yellow Sky, studying the compound. 2 at the gate, 1 on the roof, 1 patrolling. "And Roke?" Tonek asked, though he already knew the answer. The trader rarely left his fortress. Too many enemies waiting for such an opportunity. Inside, the big room with many lamps. He counts his gold every night. They had been watching for 2 days, learning the rhythms of the place. When guards changed shifts, when they grew lazy with routine, when Roke drank himself toward sleep. Tonight, everything aligned. Clouds gathering to hide the moon, guards weary from a long day, and most importantly, a supply wagon due to arrive at dawn that would provide their escape cover. "Remember," Tonek said softly, "we are ghosts. No killing unless forced. The woman's safety above all else." The plan was simple in its essence, complex in its execution. Swift Elk and Red Moon would neutralize the gate guards with sleeping herbs. Broken Arrow would take the roof sentry. Yellow Sky would handle the patroller. That would leave Tonek and Dancing Crow to enter the compound and extract Abigail. They moved like shadows down the slope, years of training allowing them to flow over the rough terrain without disturbing a single stone. The desert night sounds continued uninterrupted, their passage no more noticeable than the wind itself. At the fence line, they separated. Tonek watched with pride as his warriors melted into position. These men understood what this mission meant. One of their own had been saved by an enemy's kindness. That debt must be repaid, no matter the risk. Swift Elk struck first. The guard at the north gate never saw the dart that pricked his neck, only felt a sudden drowsiness before slumping against his post. Seconds later, his partner joined him in herb-induced sleep. One by one, the sentries fell to Apache's skill and patience. Tonek slipped through the gate, Dancing Crow at his shoulder. The main building loomed before them, light spilling from cracks in the shutters. They could hear Roke's voice, slurred with whiskey, and another man's laughter. But where was Abigail? As if in answer, a door opened at the side of the building. She emerged carrying a bucket, moving toward the well. Tonek's heart clenched at the sight of her, thinner than before. Bruises visible on her arms, but still carrying herself with quiet dignity. He gave the call of a nighthawk, soft but distinct. Her head snapped up, the bucket falling from nerveless fingers. For a heartbeat, she stood frozen. Then she was running, not toward him but back to the building. Confusion flared until he understood. She was warning him. Through the window, he saw her enter the main room, saw Roke's head turn toward her. Whatever she said made the traitor surge to his feet, reaching for his rifle. "Go!" Tonek hissed to Dancing Crow. "Get the horses ready." He sprinted across the courtyard as Roke burst from the building, rifle raised. The traitor's shot split the night, splinters exploding from the post beside Tonek's head. But before he could fire again, Abigail threw herself at him, spoiling his aim. "Stupid woman," Roke backhanded her, sending her sprawling, then swung the rifle back toward Tonek. The distance was too great for rushing him, too open for dodging. But Tonek didn't need to do either. His knife flew true, striking the rifle stock and sending it spinning from Roke's hands. In the same motion, he drew his second blade. "Apache dog," Roke snarled, pulling his own knife. "Come to die for your white squaw." They circled each other in the lamplight, while shouts arose from the bunkhouse as other men scrambled for weapons. Time was running out. Roke lunged, surprisingly fast for his bulk. Tonek sidestepped, his blade leaving a red line across the traitor's arm. They exchanged strikes, testing each other, while Abigail struggled to her feet. "I'll gut you like I did your brother last winter," Roke taunted. "Sold his scalp for $5. The words were meant to provoke, and they succeeded. But Tonek channeled his rage into cold precision. When Roke overextended on his next thrust, Tonek was ready. He trapped the traitor's wrist, pivoted, and drove his knee into Roke's ribs. As the big man doubled over, Tonek's blade found the spot between shoulder and chest, not a killing blow, but one that would end the fight. Roke collapsed, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Around them, the compound erupted in chaos as Tonek's warriors engaged the emerging guards with arrows and war cries. "Can you ride?" Tonek asked Abigail, pulling her to her feet. "Yes, but—" "No time. Come." But she resisted, turning back to the fallen traitor. "The ledger," she said urgently. "He records everything. Murders blamed on Apache, bribes to soldiers, evidence." Understanding flashed through him. She darted inside while he stood guard, emerging seconds later with a leather-bound book. "Now we go," he said, and this time she didn't resist. Dancing Crow had the horses ready beyond the fence line. Tonek lifted Abigail onto a painted mare, swinging up behind her. Around them, his warriors materialized from the shadows. All accounted for. Mission complete. "Riders coming," Yellow Sky reported. "Many dawn patrol from fort." They fled into the desert night, 6 Apache warriors and 1 white woman, while behind them Roke's curses split the air. The horses ran sure-footed through terrain that would challenge soldiers used to roads and daylight. Miles fell away beneath thundering hooves. Only when they reached the hidden canyon where extra horses waited did they slow. Abigail slumped against Tonek, exhaustion and relief finally catching up. He held her steady, marveling at her courage. "You came back," she whispered. "I told him you wouldn't, but you did." "You are Sheikah," he replied simply. "Family protects family." She held up the ledger. "This book? It proves everything. The murders, the conspiracy to start a war. We could stop it all. But to whom could they deliver such evidence? What white authority would believe Apache testimony or care about justice for natives? The system was built to protect men like Roke, not punish them. "We will find a way," he promised. "But first, you safe. You choose now. I take you to town, to other whites, or—" He hesitated, then forged ahead. "Or you come with us, be part of my people. Not easy life, but free life, respected life." She turned in the saddle to look at him, and in her eyes he saw the answer before she spoke it. "I've been alone among my own kind my whole life. You and your people are the first to see me as family, if they'll have me." "They will have," he assured her, "White Dove especially. She wait to meet sister who save her brother." "Then I choose family," Abigail said firmly. "I choose you." As dawn broke over the desert, painting the rocks in shades of rose and gold, they rode on together. Behind them lay the world that had rejected them both, his for the color of his skin, hers for the kindness of her heart. Ahead waited uncertainty, challenges, the need to build bridges between two peoples who had known mainly war. But for now, in this moment, they had each other. Tonek felt the weight of her trust as she leaned back against his chest, finally allowing exhaustion to claim her. The river jade still rested against his heart, warm with promise. Soon she would wear the eagle again, mended with silver to make it stronger than before, a symbol of how broken things could be made whole through patient care. "See how the spirits work." Broken Arrow rode up beside them, grinning. Apache warrior saved by white woman saved by Apache warriors. Maybe this how peace begins, one kindness at a time. Maybe so, Tonek agreed, tightening his protective hold on Abigail. The ledger she carried might never see justice in white courts, but among his people it would be known, the truth preserved. And perhaps someday, when the world was ready for such truths, it would matter. For now, what mattered was this promises kept, family chosen, and love growing in the space between two worlds. The hunter had indeed become the hunted, but in losing that game, both had won something infinitely more precious, a future neither could have imagined when a wounded warrior met a lonely girl at a desert spring. The sun climbed higher, blessing their journey with light and warmth. Somewhere ahead, White Dove prepared healing songs and welcomed a new sister. Somewhere behind, Roke nursed his wounds and raged at his loss. But here, in the eternal now of the desert morning, two hearts beat as one, proof that understanding could bloom even in the harshest ground. They rode on together into the vast embrace of the homeland, where eagles soared free and families were made not just by blood, but by choice, courage, and the endless capacity of the human heart to see past difference to the truth that connected all living things. The circle of firelight cast dancing shadows as Tonek stood before the gathered warriors, his voice carrying clear in the night air. 3 days had passed since their rescue of Abigail. 3 days of hard riding to reach this hidden canyon where his band made their winter camp. Now came the moment of reckoning. "This woman saved my life," he declared, one hand resting on Abigail's shoulder where she knelt beside him. "When I lay dying, when any white would have left me or called soldiers, she risked all to help. She is my Sheikah. I ask you accept her as one of us." Murmurs rippled through the assembled Apache. Some faces showed curiosity, others suspicion. Standing among the women, White Dove watched with keen interest, having already spent hours with Abigail, teaching her basic words and marveling at her knowledge of healing plants. An elder warrior named Knife Hand rose to speak. "She is white. Whites take our land, kill our people. How can we trust her?" "Did she not prove herself?" Tonek countered. "Did she not suffer imprisonment and beating rather than betray me? Look at her arms. Those marks come from saving Apache life." "Words are wind," said another warrior. Black Cloud. "Let her prove herself as all must prove themselves. Let her face the trial." Tonek's jaw tightened. The trial was meant for Apache youth coming of age, not for outsiders. But he recognized the challenge for what it was, a way to maintain honor while testing Abigail's worthiness. "What trial?" Abigail asked softly in the Apache words White Dove had taught her. Her pronunciation was clumsy, but the effort earned approving nods. "You must bring something of value to the people." The chief, Tall Pine, explained in careful English, "Something that shows your heart, your skill, your place among us. You have 3 days." As the council dispersed, Abigail turned to Tonek with worried eyes. "What can I bring? I have nothing." "You have more than you know," White Dove interjected, joining them. "Come, we talk." Over the following days, Abigail threw herself into learning. She helped the women gather piñon nuts and prepare meals, earning grudging respect for her willingness to work. She watched the children play, noticed how one boy, Little Fox, limped from an old injury that hadn't healed properly. "May I look?" she asked his mother, gesturing to the child's leg. Suspicion flickered across the woman's face, but something in Abigail's manner, perhaps the memory of her own child's suffering, made her nod. Abigail examined the poorly set bone with gentle hands. "I can help," she said in her halting Apache. "My mother taught me. Need willow bark, yarrow, straight wood for splint." The healing took time and patience. She showed Little Fox's mother how to prepare the bark tea for pain, how to wrap the reset leg properly, how to exercise it gradually. When the boy took his first painless steps 2 days later, word spread quickly through the camp. Soon other mothers brought their children, a girl with persistent cough, a baby with fever, a woman with birthing pains. Abigail worked alongside White Dove, combining Apache and white healing knowledge. But she knew healing alone wouldn't be enough for the trial. On the morning of the 3rd day, she found Tonek preparing his weapons. The ledger from Roke's trading post lay nearby, its damning contents useless in their world. "This book," she said suddenly, "it shows crimes against your people, but white authorities won't listen. What if we make them listen differently?" Tonek looked up, intrigued. "How?" "There's a man in Tucson, Samuel Worthington. He writes for newspapers back east, tells stories about the frontier. He came to Dry Hollow once, asking questions about Apache raids. He seemed different, like he wanted truth, not just sensation. You would go to Tucson to whites who might arrest you." "Not alone," she said firmly. "But if some of your people came, if we brought the ledger and testimony, maybe one honest white man could make others listen." It was risky beyond measure, but the potential to expose the conspiracy, to prevent the war that men like Roke wanted to start, was worth considering. That evening, Abigail stood again before the council. In her arms, she carried Little Fox, walking now without pain. Behind her, 3 mothers whose children she'd helped stood in silent support. "I bring 2 gifts," she said in Apache, made stronger by 3 days of constant practice. First, healing for your children. I share what my mother knew. Learn what your grandmothers know. Together, we make stronger medicine. She set Little Fox down, and he ran to his mother, laughing. The sight brought smiles even to stern faces. Second gift is harder, she continued, switching to English for complexity. This book contains evidence of white men's crimes, murders blamed on Apache, bribes to start war. I know a journalist who might publish this truth. I offer to go, to be bridge between worlds, to use my white face to speak Apache truth where Apache voices cannot go. Silence greeted her words. Then, Knife Hand, who had challenged her initially, stood. This is dangerous gift. You could die, be imprisoned. Why risk this for people not your own? Abigail met his gaze steadily. Because you are my people now. Tonek named me Sheikah. Family protects family, even at great cost. The old warrior studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. This one has courage, and wisdom to know sometimes best weapon is truth spoken in enemy's own language. One by one, the council voted. When Tall Pine finally stood, his decision was clear. Abigail, who heals, will go to Tucson, but not alone. Tonek and 2 warriors will shadow her, ensure her safety. If she succeeds, she proves herself. If she fails, he shrugged eloquently. She will not fail. White Dove declared, I have seen her spirit. She is Apache in her heart, even if her skin says otherwise. Later, as the camp settled for the night, Tonek found Abigail sitting alone, staring at the fire. The repaired eagle pendant, now reinforced with silver wire, gleamed at her throat. You don't have to do this, he said softly. You already proved yourself with the healing. No, she replied. Healing helps individuals. This could help all your people. How can I not try? He sat beside her, their shoulders touching. When I lay fevered in that cave, I dreamed sometimes, saw a white woman standing between 2 peoples, hands extended to both. I thought it was death vision. Now I think maybe it was true vision. I'm frightened, she admitted. What if Worthington won't listen? What if they arrest me? What if... He stopped her words with a gentle finger to her lips. What if you succeed? What if truth spoken bravely changes everything? She caught his hand, holding it against her cheek. Something had been growing between them through all their trials, something deeper than gratitude or even family bonds. But this wasn't the time for such things, not with tomorrow's dangers looming. Whatever happens, she said, I'm glad I found you by the spring that day. Glad I chose to help. Not just help, he corrected. You chose to see. That is rarest gift. They sat in companionable silence, drawing strength from each other's presence. Tomorrow would bring the journey to Tucson, the dangerous gamble of trusting truth to overcome prejudice. Success could mean preventing a war. Failure could mean death or worse for them all. But tonight, under stars that blessed Apache and white alike, they were simply 2 people who had found in each other the home they'd never expected. The trial had become more than a test of worthiness. It had become a chance to forge a new path between their peoples. When this is over, Tonek said quietly, when you have proven what I already know, there is something I would ask you. She turned to him, seeing in his eyes what that something might be. Ask me now, she whispered. Tomorrow is uncertain. We have only this moment. When you return successful, when the people sing your name with honor, will you let me court you properly, not as Apache courts white, or white courts Apache, but as man courts woman he wishes to spend his life beside? Her answer came without hesitation. Yes, though I warn you, I know nothing of proper courting, Apache or otherwise. His rare smile transformed his face. Then we learn together, make our own way. Like everything else we've done, she agreed, leaning into his warmth. Above them, an eagle cried out in the darkness, a hunting call that spoke of freedom and fierce joy. Tomorrow would bring its trials. But tonight they had each other and the promise of a future neither could have imagined when fate brought them together at a desert spring. The fire burned low as they talked quietly, planning tomorrow's journey, sharing hopes and fears. Around them, the camp slept peacefully, protected by warriors and held together by bonds stronger than blood. And at the heart of it, two unlikely souls prepared to risk everything for a chance at truth, justice, and the possibility of peace between peoples too long divided by fear and lies. The trial had begun as a test of whether a white woman could become Apache. It would end as something far greater, a test of whether courage and compassion could bridge the chasm between two worlds and create something entirely new. Tomorrow would tell. But tonight, hope burned brighter than the stars. The streets of Tucson bustled with morning activity as Abigail made her way toward the newspaper office, the precious ledger hidden beneath her shawl. She'd traded her Apache dress for a simple calico frock borrowed from a missionary outpost, though the eagle pendant remained hidden at her throat, somewhere in the shadows. She knew Tonek and his warriors watched, ready to intervene if danger arose. The Arizona Territorial Herald occupied a narrow building squeezed between a saloon and a general store. Through the window, she could see the printing press and smell the sharp scent of ink. Her heart hammered as she pushed open the door, a small bell announcing her arrival. Samuel Worthington looked up from his desk, spectacles perched on his nose, ink stains on his fingers. He was younger than she remembered, perhaps 30, with intelligent eyes that widened in recognition. "I remember you," he said slowly. "Dry Hollow. The Mercy girl. You served water while I interviewed your uncle about Apache raids." "Yes, sir, I have information you might find interesting. About those raids." His eyebrows rose. "Indeed, please. Sit. Would you like some coffee?" As she settled into the offered chair, she noticed his keen observation, taking in her sun-darkened skin, the calluses on her hands, the way she moved with desert-learned caution. "Mr. Worthington, what I'm about to show you could put us both in danger, but I believe you're an honest man who cares about truth." "Truth is my business, Miss Mercy, though I've found it's often bad for one's health in the territories." She withdrew the ledger, placing it carefully on his desk. "This belonged to Silas Roque. It documents a conspiracy to provoke war with the Apache by committing murders and blaming them on native raiders." Worthington's casual manner vanished. He opened the ledger, scanning pages with growing excitement and horror. "These names, these are Army officers, territorial officials. The dates correspond with raids that sparked retaliation. Good God, this is evidence of deliberate murder for profit and political gain." Abigail finished. "I've seen the victims of this conspiracy. Mr. Worthington, both white and Apache, killed to feed greed and hatred." He looked up sharply. "How did you come by this? Roque wouldn't have given it up willingly." "He acquired me from my uncle, intended to use me as bait for an Apache warrior he was hunting. The warrior and his people freed me, and I took the ledger during the escape." "You've been living with the Apache." His tone held curiosity rather than condemnation. "They saved me, gave me family when my own people sold me like livestock. I've seen their side of this conflict. Mr. Worthington, they want peace, but men like those in that ledger profit from war." He studied her for a long moment. "You're asking me to publish allegations against powerful men based on evidence provided by someone who openly consorts with the Apache. You realize what that could mean?" "I realize people are dying for lies, that a war is being manufactured to steal land and lives. If you won't help." "I didn't say I wouldn't help." He pulled out a fresh notebook. "But we'll need more than the ledger. I'll need your full testimony, details about specific incidents, and even then..." Over the next 2 hours, Abigail told her story. About finding Tonek, about the false accusations against him, about Roque's involvement in the conspiracy. Worthington took careful notes, occasionally asking probing questions that showed his journalist's instincts. The cavalry button, he muttered at one point. That's damning. Captain Morrison's unit was supposedly patrolling 50 miles away when the Hendricks family was killed, but if soldiers were involved... A commotion in the street interrupted them. Through the window, Abigail saw uniformed soldiers surrounding the building. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the officer leading them, Captain James Morrison, Deputy Morrison's brother. "Back door," Worthington hissed, scooping up the ledger and his notes. "Quickly!" But as they reached the rear exit, more soldiers waited. Morrison himself entered through the front, his face twisted with cold fury. "Miss Mercy, or should I say, the Apache sympathizer, you've led us quite a chase." "Captain Morrison." Worthington stepped forward. "This woman is under the protection of the press. She's providing testimony for a story." Morrison backhanded him casually, sending the journalist sprawling. "Shut your mouth, ink slinger. This woman is wanted for aiding enemies of the territory." His eyes fixed on the ledger in Worthington's hands. "I'll take that. Evidence of murder and conspiracy." Abigail found her voice. "Yes, I imagine you would want that buried." Morrison's hand dropped to his pistol. "Careful, girl. Accidents happen when subduing dangerous fugitives." In front of witnesses, Worthington struggled to his feet, blood trickling from his lip. "In broad daylight." "What witnesses?" Morrison smiled coldly. "I see only a traitor and a troublemaking journalist who attacked a federal officer." The tension stretched taut until Abigail thought it might snap. Then, through the window, came a sound that made the soldiers freeze, an Apache war cry, followed by another and another. "They're in the town," a soldier shouted. "Apaches." Morrison grabbed Abigail's arm. "Your friends, how many?" She met his eyes steadily. "More than enough." In truth, she knew Tonek had only 2 warriors with him, but the soldiers didn't know that. As Morrison hesitated, torn between securing his prisoner and responding to the perceived threat, Worthington acted. The journalist threw the ledger into the printing press and yanked the lever. Pages scattered as the press crashed down, ink exploding across the evidence. Morrison roared in rage, but the damage was done. The ledger was destroyed, but Worthington smiled grimly. "Good thing I already transcribed the relevant passages and sent copies to my editors in San Francisco and Washington this morning." Morrison's face went white. "You're lying." "Am I? Check the telegraph office, though I suspect they'll confirm multiple messages sent to Eastern papers about a conspiracy involving territorial officers." Amazing how quickly news travels these days. More war cries echoed through the streets. Closer now. Tonek was taking incredible risks, showing himself in town to create this diversion. Morrison had to make a choice. "Take them both," he snarled. "We'll sort this out at the fort." But as the soldiers moved to comply, the door burst open. 3 Apache warriors stood there, faces painted for war, weapons ready. Tonek's eyes found Abigail's across the chaos. "Nobody move," Morrison shouted, but his men were already backing away. 3 warriors shouldn't have been enough to cow a dozen soldiers, but Apache reputation and the confined space worked in their favor. "The woman comes with us," Tonek said in clear English. "The paperman, too, if he wishes." "Over my dead body," Morrison growled. Tonek smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "If necessary." Abigail stepped forward. "Enough people have died for your greed. Captain, Mr. Worthington has already sent the story. Killing us won't stop the truth." "Maybe not," Morrison conceded. "But it'll satisfy me." He drew his pistol in one smooth motion, aiming at Abigail. Time seemed to slow. She saw Tonek moving, too far away. Saw Worthington diving toward them. Saw Morrison's finger tightening on the trigger. The shot was impossibly loud in the enclosed space. But it wasn't Morrison's gun that fired. Deputy Morrison stood in the doorway, smoking rifle aimed at his brother's shoulder. The captain's pistol clattered to the floor as he clutched his wounded arm. "That's enough, James," the deputy said quietly. "I've looked the other way too long, pretending I didn't see what you were becoming, but not murder, not in front of me." "You fool," the captain gasped. "You've ruined everything." "No, you ruined it when you decided Apache blood was worth more than your honor." The deputy looked at Abigail. "Go. Take your evidence and go. I'll handle this." Tonek didn't need further invitation. He pulled Abigail toward the door, Worthington following with his salvaged notes. As they reached the street, the journalist called out, "Miss Mercy, the story will run, I promise you, the whole truth." "Thank you," she called back, then let Tonek lift her onto a waiting horse. They fled Tucson in broad daylight, Apache warriors and a white woman riding together while townspeople watched in amazement. Behind them, shouts and confusion as the Morrison brothers faced their reckoning. Only when they reached the safety of the hills did they slow. Tonek pulled Abigail from her horse into a fierce embrace. "Too dangerous," he murmured against her hair. "Should not have let you go." "But we did it," she said, wonder in her voice. "The story will be told. The truth will be known. At what cost you can never go back to White World now. They will call you traitor." She pulled back to look at him. "Then it's fortunate I already chose my world." That evening, they returned to the Apache camp as heroes. The trial was complete beyond anyone's imagination. Not only had Abigail proven her worth, she'd struck a blow for justice that would resonate far beyond their small band. As the celebration began around the fire, Tall Pine himself placed a beautifully beaded shawl around her shoulders, the mark of full acceptance into the people. "You are Apache now," he declared. "In heart, in deed, in name. What name will you carry among us?" Abigail looked at Tonek, at White Dove beaming with pride, at the faces that had become her true family. "If it pleases the people, I would be called She Who Bridges, for that is what I hope to be, a bridge between worlds that have too long stood apart." "It is a good name," Tall Pine approved. "May you wear it with honor." As the dancing began, Tonek drew her aside. "Now you have proven what I knew. Now I can ask properly." He dropped to one knee, offering a necklace of silver and turquoise. "Will She Who Bridges become wife to this warrior?" Her answer came through tears of joy. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The celebration lasted through the night, drumming, dancing, songs of victory and new beginnings. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the firelight, the desert stretched endless and eternal, holding space for all who belonged to it. And in the heart of the celebration, two people who had found each other against all odds held tight to their hard-won happiness. They'd change nothing and everything. The great sweep of history would continue. Conflicts would arise, prejudices would persist. But truth had been spoken. Lives had been saved. And in one small corner of the vast frontier, love had proven stronger than hate, courage more powerful than fear, and the bonds of chosen family unbreakable as the mountains themselves. The morning sun painted the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson as the wedding ceremony began. Abigail, now She Who Bridges, stood beside White Dove in the women's lodge, her hands trembling slightly as her soon-to-be sister-in-law adjusted the traditional dress they'd spent weeks preparing. "You are nervous?" White Dove asked gently, securing an elaborate silver and turquoise necklace around Abigail's throat. "Terrified," Abigail admitted. "Not of marrying Tonek, but what if I do something wrong? What if I offend someone without meaning to?" White Dove smiled, touching the eagle pendant that still rested against Abigail's heart. "You saved my brother. You risked your life for our people's truth. No one will be offended if you stumble over words or miss a step in the dance. Love needs no perfect ceremony." Outside, drums began their ancient rhythm. Through the lodge opening, Abigail could see the entire band gathered. Even those who'd initially opposed her presence now waited to witness this unprecedented union. The success in Tucson had changed everything. Worthington's articles had indeed been published, causing an uproar that led to several arrests and a federal investigation. While it hadn't solved all conflicts between Apache and white settlers, it had exposed the conspiracy and given peace advocates on both sides ammunition for their cause. Tall Pine appeared at the entrance. "It is time, daughter." The endearment made her eyes mist. Months ago, she'd been nobody, an invisible servant in a harsh household. Now she was daughter to a chief, sister to a healer, and about to become wife to the bravest man she'd ever known. The ceremony blended traditions from both worlds, a bridge in itself. Tonek waited by the sacred fire, wearing his finest buckskins and the river jade pendant she'd given him so long ago. His face, usually so stoic, blazed with joy when he saw her. As Tall Pine spoke the binding words in Apache, with White Dove translating softly, Abigail thought of her parents. Would they understand the path that had led her here? She liked to think her mother would approve. Hadn't she always taught that healing knew no boundaries? Two peoples stand here. Tall Pine intoned. Divided by birth, united by choice. Let this union be a sign that understanding is possible, that love can bloom even in hostile ground. They exchanged vows in both languages, promises of protection, partnership, and purpose that transcended simple marriage. When Tonek placed a wedding band of braided silver on her finger, a compromise between Apache and white customs, she felt the weight of all they represented. "Now," Tall Pine smiled, "dance together so all may see your joy." The celebration erupted in music and movement. Abigail had practiced the traditional dances until her feet knew every step, but nothing had prepared her for the overwhelming emotion of performing them as Tonek's wife, surrounded by her new family's approval. As night fell and the festivities continued, Samuel Worthington arrived with a small escort of soldiers, not Morrison's men, but federal troops sent to investigate the conspiracy. The journalist carried a package wrapped in oilcloth. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, clearly awed by the ceremony he'd stumbled into. "But I have news and a wedding gift." The package contained copies of Eastern newspapers. The conspiracy story had exploded across the nation, with editorials calling for reform in territorial governance and fair treatment of Native peoples. But more personally, there was a letter from a law firm in Boston. "Your parents left a will," Worthington explained to a stunned Abigail. "A small inheritance held in trust. Your uncle had no legal right to keep you in servitude. With the publicity from the articles, the lawyers were able to locate you. It's not much, but enough to start a school if you wished, or buy supplies for a clinic." Abigail looked at Tonek, wordless communication passing between them. "A school," she said finally, "where Apache and white children could learn together, where healing ways could be preserved and shared." "Here," Worthington gestured to the canyon. "It's rather remote. Between here and the nearest town," Tonek suggested. "Neutral ground, safe for all." The idea sparked excited discussion among the elders. Education that honored both traditions, that might help prepare the next generation for a changing world while preserving ancient wisdom. It was a dream worth pursuing. As the evening wound down, Tonek drew Abigail away from the crowd to a quiet overlook where stars filled the sky like scattered diamonds. Below them, the celebration continued, but here they found a moment of peace. "No regrets?" he asked softly, pulling her against his side. "How could I regret finding home?" She turned in his arms to face him. "You gave me more than love. Tonek, you gave me purpose, family, a place to belong. You saw me when I was invisible." "You were never invisible," he corrected, cupping her face gently. "Only hidden, waiting to shine, like stars behind clouds." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their blended families celebrate below. Apache and white, ancient ways and new ideas, all mixing in a harmony that most said was impossible. "What do you think our children will be?" Abigail asked eventually. "Apache white. Something in between. They will be bridges." Tonek said with certainty, like their mother, they will walk both worlds and help others cross between them. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of possibility. There would be challenges, prejudice from both sides, the ongoing conflicts between their peoples, the difficulty of maintaining their ideals in a harsh world. But tonight, wrapped in each other's arms under the vast desert sky, they had everything they needed. A year later, the school opened its doors, built with Abigail's inheritance and Apache labor. Blessed by both Christian ministers and Apache medicine men, it stood as a testament to what cooperation could achieve. Children from both communities attended, learning letters and numbers alongside traditional stories and survival skills. Abigail, heavy with their first child, watched from the doorway as Tonek helped a group of boys, Apache and white together, learn to track animals in the sand. The sight filled her with hope for the future they were building one small step at a time. White Dove joined her, carrying her own infant son. You think sometimes about the other path, the life you might have had. Abigail touched her swollen belly, feeling the strong kicks of the child within, a child who would know both worlds, who would carry forward their legacy of bridge building. Never, she said firmly. That girl who fetched water in Dry Hollow, who lived in shadows and silence, she found her true self at a spring, saving a wounded warrior. Everything since has been the life I was meant to live. As the sun set over their small school, painting the desert in familiar shades of gold and red, Abigail gave thanks for the winding path that had led her here. From orphaned servant to Apache wife, from invisible girl to bridge between worlds, it was a transformation that spoke to the power of choosing love over fear, understanding over prejudice. The children's laughter echoed across the canyon as they played together, Apache and white, their young hearts not yet taught to hate, in their joy. Abigail saw the future, not perfect, not without challenges, but bright with possibility. Tonek appeared at her side, slipping an arm around her expanded waist. The federal marshal visited today. He said, Morrison was convicted. 20 years hard labor. The investigation continues. Good, she said simply. Justice had been slow, but it had come. He also brought this. Tonek produced a letter bearing an official seal. Recognition from the president himself for our efforts to promote peace and understanding between peoples. They want us to speak in Washington. Abigail laughed, imagining herself addressing Congress in her Apache dress and silver jewelry. What will we tell them? The truth, Tonek said. That peace begins with seeing the humanity in your enemy. That love is stronger than hate. That bridges can be built even across the deepest divides. And that, sometimes, Abigail added, all it takes is one person choosing kindness in a moment of crisis. One hand extended across the divide. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they stood together watching their community, their family settle in for the evening. The school bell, forged from melted silver and copper to represent both cultures, caught the last light of day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The work of building understanding was never finished, never easy. But tonight, in this place they'd created together, hope lived and breathed and grew. The orphan girl and the Apache warrior had found more than love. They'd found a purpose that would outlive them both. In the distance, an eagle called out as it returned to its nest, and Abigail smiled. She'd learned to fly at last, and in flying, had helped others find their wings. It was enough. It was everything. The sacred fire burned on, blessing their union and all it represented, proof that in the vast, harsh beauty of the desert, the most unlikely seeds could take root and bloom into something extraordinary. Their love had bridged two worlds, and in doing so, had created a third way, a path of hope for all who dared to walk it. Under the eternal stars, in the land that had tested and shaped them both, she who bridges and her warrior stood together, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. They'd already achieved the impossible. Everything else was just another adventure in their extraordinary journey together. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, courage, and bridging two worlds in the Old West. I'm curious to know, where in the world are you listening to this tale right now? Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what you thought about Abigail and Tonek's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help more people discover this tale of love conquering prejudice in the harsh but beautiful frontier. Your support means the world to me.